Welcome to 843 TV. I'm your host, Will Wareham. I'm coming to you today from the Santa Elena History Center in downtown Beaufort, and I'll be joined by Dr. Andy Bell, who is the Executive Director of the Santa Elena Foundation, Dr. Chester DePratter, who is the lead archaeologist for the Santa Elena Foundation, and finally Megan Meyer, who is the Director of Development for the Santa Elena Foundation. So stick around for more 843 TV, where communities come to speak.
.843 TV, where Bluffton comes to speak.
Where Spring Island comes to speak.
Where Hilton Head Island comes to speak.
Where Beaufort comes to speak.
.843 TV,
where communities come to speak. Welcome to 843 TV. I'm now joined by Dr. Andy Bell, who is the Executive Director for the Santa Elena Foundation. Dr. Bell, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
Absolutely. So we're here in the Santa Elena History Center on Bay Street in downtown Beaufort, and it's a beautiful facility. The last time we shot one of these shows together, we were out at the Charles Fort site on Parris Island, talking about the evolution of the Santa Elena Foundation and some of the history. How have we made that gap just in a couple of short years? How has the experience been for you?
Wow, it's great to be here in this place because the last time we were together, we were actually out at the historic site on Parris Island. And now we're sitting in this incredible facility, which is the former federal courthouse, and we're actually in the federal courtroom that has now been transformed and is under construction to be the first inaugural exhibit. But when I think about where we are today and where we were then, my goodness, it's a blur. A lot of fun. This foundation's only been around 2 years.
Right.
Organized by a number of civic leaders and scholars who had a great idea that this story should be told, needs to be told.
Right.
And boy, we've marched forward ever since then.
Yes.
So it's been a very fast-paced couple of years as we have consolidated on what story should be told.
Right.
Brought together the attention and interest of all the scholars that know this story and done this research. Then brought it to the community and began to engage people in the community. The most important of which, frankly, is the volunteers. We've had so many volunteers that have come forward and said, we're excited about this, we want to be a part of what's happening, and they have just made it possible. Then on top of that, we've had partner organizations, starting with the University of South Carolina, Beaufort, which they allowed us to actually operate for probably the first 18 months because we met in their conference room, which was so wonderful to have a place that we could function. And then it just has been a constant march to where we're now physically operating with a building, regular hours.
Right.
It's just so exciting.
It is an exciting time for Beaufort and for Beaufort County and for South Carolina and for America, really. And there's still room for more partnerships and more volunteers, right? I mean,
no question, no question. The things that we have to do are enormous, and we're really excited about that. You mentioned, this is a story that took place here, and the rebirth or telling of the story is occurring in Beaufort. But it's truly an international story.
Sure.
And we have a lot of help from Spain side, which has been tremendous help. In fact, this exhibit that we will open was originally developed by a arm of the Spanish government, by a cultural nonprofit organization owned by the Spanish government. And so to have the bones of this exhibit working with the Spaniards is just phenomenal. We also were invited to, just more about how international, we were invited to go to Washington and make a presentation at the World Bank, and then the next day to do a presentation sponsored by the Spanish Embassy, which was just very well received. So this story percolates and is spreading out from right here in Beaufort County.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to learn more about that story and some of the events that you're going to host here and around the area to kick off the 450th celebration of the Spanish arrival here just off of our coastline here, and that's an incredible thing to be a part of, isn't it?
It is. I mean, wow. I mean, when we began this story, began this work, one of the things that came up very quickly is that 2016 is the 450th commemoration of the arrival of Pedro Menendez de Avilés and establishing Santa Elena. So it's been a pacing item for us all along.
Right.
And now here we are in April, and it's upon us. So it's fun, it's exciting, it's crazy. And it's something that the public really should enjoy coming to see.
Absolutely. We're going to learn a little bit more about the history with Dr. Chester DePrater here coming up, and then about some of the events that y'all have planned. So Dr. Bell, thank you so much for all you've done here and for our community.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today.
Appreciate it very much.
Now stick around for another segment of 843 TV. Welcome to 843 TV. I'm now joined by Dr. Chester DePrater, who's the lead archaeologist here at the Santa Elena Foundation and also a professor of archaeology at the University of South Carolina. Dr. DePrater, Chester, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So we're here now in the beginning stages of the Santa Elena History Center. And you've got a little bit of a history with the Santa Elena site and the archaeology, and we're going to get into that a little bit later. But would you mind telling our viewers a little bit about your background and how you started in archaeology and what you're doing now?
Sure. Well, back when I started at the University of Georgia in the 60s, I was a biology major. And toward the end of my junior year, I decided to change to anthropology, which includes archaeology, and ended up getting my undergraduate degree and then continued on to graduate school there. So 1968 is when I first began studying archaeology, and after a short stint in the Coast Guard, I began doing archaeology on my own only a couple years after I became an anthropology major. So since 1970, which is now, 46 years, I've been doing field archaeology, and it's all of it in Georgia and South Carolina, so pretty much local.
Okay, and speaking of local archaeology, how long have you been working on the Santa Elena site here in Beaufort County?
Well, as a graduate student at the University of Georgia, I worked with Professor Charles Hudson, who was very interested in tracing the routes of Spanish explorers in the interior of the Southeast in the 16th century. And through that, I developed a very strong interest in the whole 16th century question of the competition between France and Spain and England for this part of the world, where the Spanish explorers went through the interior in their efforts to understand this new land and find ideal place for settlements. So that when I came to South Carolina in 1984, I stepped away from that a little bit and began working on Indian populations that lived in the interior around Camden, South Carolina. And I did that for a couple of years, and then through my work with Stanley South, who was an archaeologist who began working here at Santa Elena in Beaufort County in 1979, he was a great colleague, was willing to share his site and his interest with me. And so in 1989, about 5 years after I came to South Carolina, we began a search for French Charles Fort, a French fort that preceded the Spanish by 4 years. And we didn't find it right away, but it was a great fun project coming to Beaufort, getting to run around and dig holes in a number of different places. And we ultimately did find the location of Charles Fort. But then after doing that for a couple of years, we were approaching the 500th anniversary of Columbus. And so I worked with the state legislature, and a Columbian Quincentennial Commission of South Carolina was established by the legislature, and I became chair of that commission. And through that, helped Stanley South get into the field and work at Santa Elena. And as head of that commission, I joined him at Santa Elena in 1991. And then we continued working on the site together until he retired several years ago. And it was a great project on a great site. So it was lucky that I fell into it. And it's led to the Santa Elena History Center ultimately.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. So What does make the Santa Elena site so unique from an archaeology perspective?
There are a number of things. The first is that it's a really important site in the history of this part of the world because it's the northernmost Spanish settlement made as Spain moved into the New World and branched out in all directions, explored and settled the Caribbean, South America, Central America, and attempted to settle North America. And Santa Elena is the northernmost outpost of those efforts. It didn't succeed. It lasted only 21 years, but it represents a real moment in time when Philip II, King of Spain, was trying to claim this previously unsettled part of Spanish Florida. So he came, he was going to put missionaries early on up at Chesapeake Bay in 1570. After he established Santa Elena in 1566. He sent expeditions into the interior to open up an overland road to Mexico from here. He made Pedro Menendez the founder of Santa Elena and Spanish Florida, made Santa Elena his capital in 1571 with the intent of bringing his family here and making this the capital.
Yeah.
So from its historical side, it's very important. From the archaeological side, it's a complete Spanish town preserved in the ground that has been carefully caretaken by the U.S. Marine Corps.
Yeah.
It was, in plantation days, there were plantations there.
Right.
In 1918, the Marine Corps acquired the part of Parris Island that includes Santa Elena.
Okay.
And since then, they've protected it. It was a training base early on, and then later, after that was in World War I, period where it wasn't used, and it became a golf course.
Right.
And so the golf course was active on top of Santa Elena until 2000. And so there's never been any major development. The site covers about 15 or 16 acres, so it's a fairly large area that is accessible and well maintained, and plus we have great security since the Marine Corps owns it.
Yeah,
so we don't have to worry about looters. So any other site of that period anywhere in this area probably would have had development on it, condos or subdivisions or shopping centers, and it's just by happenstance that it's been in a place that has been so well protected for so long. So it makes the archaeology ideal.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one of my good friends is a city archaeologist in St. Augustine, where the 16th century Spanish occupation is buried about 5 feet below the present ground surface, and that 5 feet is all rubble from collapsed buildings and old roadways and garbage. So, and the earlier 16th century has been chopped through by wells and post holes and ditches. So when my friend in St. Augustine wants to dig 16th century archaeology, he comes up here to work with me because it's almost inaccessible to him.
Wow.
So it's a major place, well preserved, and the amount of history preserved there is probably unmatchable for anything of the period anywhere nearby, at least.
Amazing. Can you describe some of the archaeology work that's been done so far at this site? I mean, was there something that you all found that kind of triggered a lot of excitement?
Well, all the way back into the 18th century, the site where Santa Elena is on Parris Island was a known place because there was a fort with a moat or a ditch standing open that had water. The locals in the 18th century, early 19th century thought it was French Charles Fort that was built by Jean Ribault in 1562 and abandoned a year later. And so for a century and a half, Beaufort residents used to go over there and dig relics out of this fort, thinking it was Charles Fort. And it was believed to be Charles Fort even after a Marine did archaeology there in the 1920s, all the way up until 1957, when a St. Augustine archaeologist came up and looked at artifacts that had been taken out of that fort and said, these are Spanish and not French. And so all along, historians in Florida had been saying, this is Santa Elena, not Charles Fort, but it wasn't until 1957 that was confirmed. And then when Stanley South came to work here in 1979, one of the main problems he had was there's no map. So Pedro Menendez, the founder of Santa Elena and the founder of Spanish Florida, came here in 1566, built a fort, ultimately established a town, made it the capital, but we don't have a map.
Right.
So we've got 15 or 16 acres of town and 30-something acres of golf course on the side of the road where Santa Elena is. And so early on, the first efforts were to try to figure out exactly where the town is and to dig small 3-foot square holes and find out where the concentrations of materials are. Plus, when Stanley South came, he was told he couldn't dig on the golf course.
Right.
So he had to dig on the wooded fringe and the space between the fairways rather than on the fairways. And so he started there, and through doing that, he found another Spanish fort that wasn't visible on the surface in his first week of archaeology here. He came out, dug a series of small holes, recognized the stains in the soil, tracked it out, and in 5 days' work, he'd identified a Spanish fort, which is pretty phenomenal.
Absolutely.
In the world of archaeology. And then after that, he worked in the areas he could. He worked in the fort that had been previously thought to be Charles Fort, that was proved to be one of Santa Elena's forts. He found several buildings that turned out to be the home and adjacent buildings belonging to the second governor of Santa Elena, though we didn't know that at the time. Then when I joined him, we started digging smaller holes, closer spaced over the whole area, determine the exact size of the town, and through that we're able to find additional forts, additional residences. We found a pottery kiln that was made and used in the late 1580s by residents of Santa Elena. But it's always been go out and dig holes and just see what's there because there's no map. We're beginning to think we know where the plaza is and where some roads are. We know where 2 forts are, but there were 5 Spanish forts in addition to the French Charles Fort.
Okay.
So there's still lots to find. And the future is going to be, the next step is going to be remote sensing, where we take machines and run them over the ground and they tell us what's buried there.
Cool.
So that we hope, if we can get permission from the Marine Corps at Parris Island for the summer to go out and do the first major project to map the entire 16-acre town and confirm where we think the plaza is, confirm where we think another of the forts is located, begin to see the layout of all the wells that would have been dug for drinking water, which will help us figure out the lot system. And so we hope in one summer's work, we can create the map that Pedro Menendez wasn't considerate enough to make for us when he was here in the 16th century.
Very cool. Well, that is absolutely fascinating stuff. Chester, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And stick around for one more segment of 843 TV. Welcome back to 843 TV. I'm now joined by Megan Meyer, who's the Director of Development for the Santa Elena Foundation. Megan, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. And so what do you have in your hand here? This looks like a very cool object.
Well, as you know, Will, and as we've discussed, we have a wonderful story to tell here about Santa Elena. And this is Pedro Menendez de Aviles. He's also here over our shoulder. He's really the lead character of the story because he was the founder. And our wonderful friend Count Alvaro Armada from Spain has commissioned this, this statue, and it will serve as the trophy for the winner of the inaugural Founders Cup Regatta that will begin our month of festivities to commemorate the 450th anniversary of his sailing into Port Royal Sound.
Absolutely. So there's going to be a boat race, is that right?
There will be a boat race thanks to our friends over at the Beaufort Yacht and Sailing Club, and that will be one of many events that we have throughout the month of April.
Well, let's start talking about some of those events. I mean, what a fantastic way to usher in the 450th anniversary of this wonderful story. So what's first? What's on tap?
Well, right after the regatta, we'll have on April 7th, students walking from a local school down to the center in a parade and a field trip format for them once they come here to the History Center. And then following that, we'll be hosting a Scholars Conference. Okay. And that's a really big deal for all of the folks who have devoted their careers to studying 16th century Spanish history, early American colonization. So we will host that at the Center for the Arts at USCB. and that'll be on April 15th, and it's free and open to the public.
Great.
So folks can come anytime during the day. We'll be there all day sharing wonderful information from scholars who will come together for the first time, actually.
Wow. But that's not the end of it, right? This celebration continues through the month of April?
It sure does. We're going to wrap up the month in a big way. We're going to have a grand opening of the Santa Elena History Center, and the exhibit that we're sitting in right now will be completed by then. So we'll cut the ribbon with a lot of supporters and volunteers and community leaders here to help us do that. And show off this inaugural exhibit for the first time, and then it will remain open to the public afterwards for folks to come in and enjoy.
What else can we expect?
In conjunction with our grand opening celebration, the galleon ship that is a replica of the flagship of Pedro Menendez, it will sail into Port Royal Sound, 450 years, almost to the day, from when they first settled Santa Elena. So we're excited to host this ship and thank greatly the town of Port Royal, where the boat will be docked from April 23rd until April 30th. And the public will be welcome to go there between the hours of 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. So the end of 11th Street in the beautiful town of Port Royal, and special thanks to O'Quinn Marine because he's giving us the apparatus we need to enable to dock such a large vessel.
Fantastic. This will be a facility that's open to the public, right?
Yes.
And have regular working hours in one of those hours?
Absolutely. We're open 6 days a week right now, so Tuesday through Sunday. And we're here to offer quite a few different options for the public. The one is our first floor introductory exhibit and also our program series, which we're really excited to have a variety of topics and presenters to help shed light on the many perspectives of this story.
Sure.
And folks can register for those. And then on the second floor here in this big, beautiful courtroom, we'll have our inaugural exhibit. So we'll also be selling tickets for folks to come up here and really dive into the details of the story of Santa Elena. The other thing I'd like to mention is that we'll have the branch of the Heritage Library open here. So we've partnered with the Heritage Library of Hilton Head, and they'll have a branch here to help folks conduct ancestry research. So that's another offering that we'll have to the public as we look beyond April, which is hard to do right now because we're so excited about everything going on. But we'll continue to be a destination for visitors and locals, for the history buffs, and just for the curious.
Absolutely, and that excitement is well deserved. I think you're in a beautiful facility right here on a beautiful stretch of road, right in front, right in front of the Beaufort River, and is generating a lot of excitement, not just in Beaufort, but across the country.
Yes.
So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching 843 TV, where communities come to speak.